I meticulously prepared about an hour introduction for Melissa Hamilton, and he told me I have 1 minute, so let's get to it. It's my privilege and my pleasure to introduce to you Melissa Hamilton. Melissa is the CEO for Stellar Asia Pacific. She has traveled all the way from Australia to be here with us. Melissa and her team of 3,500 employees have been practicing the great game for over 15 years, and in 2009 they won the prestigious Great Game of Business Hall of Fame Award. Melissa is very passionate, as you're about to hear, about teaching people the rules of the game and believes that open book management is Stellar's key competitive advantage underpinning the business success in building long-term partnership with clients and employees. Melissa is convinced after playing for 15 years that open book management is an ongoing journey and it is critical to invest energy in educating teams each and every day. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to our first keynote speaker, Melissa Hamilton.
Thank you. Thanks. Good morning. I have been so excited about coming over to share our story that I was like a little kid before Christmas on the flight on the way over. Most of you might know that travelling from Australia, firstly to LA, is a 15-hour journey. So that's a reasonably long time without any sleep, but there's an upside. It meant that I got to make some new friends and I had quite a lot of time to practice today's keynote. The guy sitting next to me, a guy called Tom, probably knows this keynote almost as well as I do today. Unfortunately, he had his own plans in the US, or I was going to invite him to come and join me here. Okay, so he knows that Stellar as an organisation is passionate about people and passionate about customers. So before we get into this, I just want to offer an apology to the audience. For anyone on Tuesday afternoon who flew on American Airlines 156 from LA to St. Louis, that was me in row 7A. I may not have slept on the first leg of my journey, but boy, I made up for it on the second one. And I was the one mouth open dribbling in row 7. Okay, I need some help from you as an audience to get started. I'm looking for a show of hands. Can you raise one hand for me if you sometimes have a little trouble trying to improve an area of your business or your bottom line? Okay, good. Keep it up. Can you raise 2 hands if you sometimes have a lot of trouble trying to improve an area of your business or your bottom line? Okay, the good news is we're all in good company and we're all in the right room. So today I'm going to share how my company Stellar and my fantastic team at Stellar basically asked ourselves the same questions and struggled with the same things when we started our organisation 16 years ago. So today what we're going to do is I'm going to share 3 stories with you, 3 stories about how we navigated the ups and downs of our journey. So as I look out into this audience and I look at what I understand is about 450 business professionals, I think there's 3 things that really unite us as an audience. The first question for most of us is, how do we engage the hearts and minds of our employees? How do we do that? The second question is really about how do we build loyal, long-term customer relationships? How do we build relationships with our customers where they don't want to leave? How do we do that? But the one thing, I think the one question that keeps all of us awake at night is, how do you build a truly sustainable business? How do you build a business that can weather the ups and downs that are going to face us on our journey? How do you do that? That was the question that we were asking 16 years ago when we started Stellar in Australia. What was going to make us different? What was going to make us stand out? And in preparing to come and talk to you today, it gave me an opportunity to really reflect on our company's history and really reflect on what was the single thing that stood out to me more than anything else that really was the key to our success as an organisation. And the one thing that stood out was the word balance. You might want to write that down. I'm going to come back to it again and again. When I talk about balance, What I mean by that is, how do we keep the three key stakeholders in our business in balance? For us, our three key stakeholders are the people in our business, they're our clients, and they're also our shareholder. So whenever we make a decision as an organisation, how do we consider the impact of that decision on each of those three stakeholders? When we plan for the future, when we plan for today, any single decision we make, how do we keep those guys in balance? Okay, let's think about the last 16 years of our history. Firstly, if I talk about Stella, we started in 1998 in Australia. Today we're 100% US privately owned. We didn't start life that way. We started life 50% owned by our US owner and a very large Australian organisation. We've got 13 sites around the globe, and today I'm very privileged to have people from most of those sites here with me. So we've got some people from the UK with us, we've got some people from Manila, and we've got a big team from Australia here as well. I'm going to talk mostly about the Asia-Pacific region because that is the region that I'm accountable for, and it's the largest in our business. We have 7 sites in Australia and we have 2 sites in Manila, and we have over 3,500 employees in the region. As was mentioned earlier, we were incredibly thrilled to receive 2 Open Book awards in our journey, with the most recent one being our inclusion into the Great Game of Business Hall of Fame in 2009. Our whole team was delighted with that. I'd like to share some pictures with you now, and they're pictures to give you a sense of who we are as an organisation. I'll talk a little bit about what we do, and I'll talk about in particular what we do for some of our clients before I get into the 3 stories. As you look at some of these pictures, it might be worth just reflecting in your own organisation. If you were up here today, what pictures would you be sharing? What would be the pictures that your company would show that would reflect who you are as an organisation? So as we step into some of these, you'll see something that for open book management companies is a very common picture. This is our teams huddling. Every site, every day, every team huddles. They have a quick get-together where they focus on exactly where are we, but most importantly, where are we going and what changes are we going to make to get there. So this is our team huddling. We play a lot of games. We spend a lot of time learning the rules. So you can see some pictures here of a competition that we ran, which was just about that, making sure people understood the rules again. That's why they're holding signs up saying we know the rules. We celebrate a lot. We do a lot of crazy things. On the far left, I think it is for you guys in that picture, you'll see a photo of a very tall building. That very tall building is 35 stories high. At the bottom of the building, you'll see 4 faces, and one of those faces is mine. A couple of years ago, we thought it would be a good thing to do for charity to abseil off of a 35-storey building and offer some of our team the chance to enter a competition and do that with us. I can say, having survived that will be the only time I abseil off of a 35-storey building. We also have a lot of celebrations. We have a lot of awards. We hand out a lot of certificates, and we say thank you a lot to people in our team. So each of our sites has an annual awards night, a big fancy gathering, and we hand out presentations to our top performers, both in terms of their key performance, but also in terms of their performance against our core values as an organisation. So we do a lot of celebrating. Stella is a call centre outsourcer. So we have very long-term relationships with our clients. We designed our business to do that. And basically what we do is if you're calling a cruise company, if you're calling an airline, if you're calling a telco, if you're calling a bank, quite often it might be a Stella employee who you're speaking to. And so here's an example of this. One of the industries that we work in is cruising. We have cruise consultants. And so this is a very large global brand, and we work with a brand in the Asia-Pacific region. And we work with our clients to transform their business. So we take our know-how, we take our culture, we link very closely with our clients to understand what exactly it is they're looking for out of the relationship, and then we work to transform their business. This client, we've basically delivered them massive efficiency savings with a 65% cost saving, and we've also increased their top line because we know how to engage with customers better and we know how to close sales. We also work in the utility space, so a lot of organisations providing gas and electricity to their customers, we support them also. One of our foundation clients, who we started working with about 13 years ago, just recently renewed their work with us for another 5 years in this space, again transforming their business. We also support airlines. Steve, where you are, you missed this one. This is a budget airline in Australia or through the Asia Pacific region. I'm not sure what their tagline is, but I couldn't make fun of it anyway because they're one of our very, very dear customers. So I'm really glad you didn't put them up there. But what we do with these guys is we maximise the revenue on every call. So yes, they do want their seats full and they rely on us to help them do that. That's just a couple of examples of what we do. Okay, let's go back then to 1998, early 1999, when I found myself as part of the startup team for Stella. Our dream at the time was to build an outsourced call centre business. Now, I know many of you are probably sitting there right now, just like I was growing up, dreaming about a job in a call centre. I'm shocked. But look, that was the reality for me too. I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I grew up in Hong Kong. My father was a pilot, so I spent a lot of time on aeroplanes growing up. And I travelled to boarding school a lot, so I'd fly back and forwards between Hong Kong and Australia to go to boarding school. So growing up, I was, as a result of that, probably fairly independent. I was a pretty confident kid, and I'm sure I was probably a pretty annoying teenager. But then most of us probably would have been. My parents knew with absolute confidence that there was one skill that I had that I was very, very good at, and that was I could talk anywhere. I could talk anytime, I could talk to anyone. And we weren't sure how we were going to translate that into something, but I was the sort of kid that would come home from a day with my friends, and the first thing I'd do would race upstairs and get on the phone to my friends to talk to them some more. So they knew that I could talk. My parents always told me I could be anything, and so they'd throw ideas out there. Why don't you be a doctor, an attorney? There's all these wonderful, exciting things, and they all sounded fantastic. I then saw a couple of the textbooks that support those courses. I read a few pages and I nodded off, and I thought that might not be for me. Now, I do need to offer my apologies, guys, because I'm sure there's some really interesting stuff that attorneys do. It just wasn't for me at the time. So I then saw an ad in a newspaper, and that was the way we got jobs in those days. There were ads in newspapers, and it was for a call centre position. It was a part-time job, talking on the phone every day, and I thought I could do that. What I didn't realise, some 20 plus years later, that's just to keep you guessing, that I would fall in love with a call centre. I would fall in love with the energy, the buzz, the people, the numbers, and the magic. Maybe when I finish the story today, you might be dreaming about a job in a call centre, even if you're not right now. So back to growing up in Hong Kong and back to my dad. I remember a lot of stories when I was growing up, but there's one in particular, some of Dad's wise words, if you like, that have stayed with me more than others. And I remember him saying to me, "Melissa, be prepared for turbulence. Keep your seatbelt on." I was reminded of these words on a personal level when my husband and I were travelling from Spain to London several years ago now. And we encountered violent turbulence, the sort of turbulence where the plane drops. Your stomach stays up here, the coffee, the cups, the plates, everything else stays up there and then drops. And we were sitting there covered in food scraps and hot coffee. I turned to my husband, who's a nervous flyer anyway, and I peeled his fingers off of the armrest at the time. And I said to him, "Darling, it's okay. We were prepared for turbulence. We had our seatbelt on." And I never realised at the time how those words and that sentiment of keeping your seatbelt on would resonate with me throughout my career and would resonate with me throughout my journey with Stella. But it really has. And in turning to Stella, I had to work out what our seatbelt was. I had to work out what was going to keep us safe and protect us as an organisation. What was Stella's seatbelt? So back to Stella. We were completely new in 1998, 1999. There were several large established players in the Australian marketplace doing exactly what we were doing. And so the question for us was, how could we be different? How could we stand out? After all, we were going to be hiring the same people. We were going to be leasing the same buildings. And I know for sure that we weren't any smarter than anyone else. Now, my predecessors might disagree with me on that point, but they're not here telling the story. So I get to say we weren't any smarter than anyone else. We knew intuitively that in a people business, what was going to make a difference was how we engaged our people, how we won over the hearts and minds of the people in our organisation. Enter open book management. And you might be wondering how we found it all the way over in Australia. When I mentioned our owners before, one of our owners was a US-based entrepreneurial owner, and he had always run his businesses, whilst perhaps not calling it open book management, he'd always run his businesses on the single principle that you should share the rewards with the people who help generate those rewards. He owned a couple of businesses that operated in the same space as us. He owned them here in the US. They had adopted open book management. So we thought, okay, we don't have anything to lose. Sounds like a good way to run a business. And so we were off. For those of you that like your facts and figures, let me just briefly focus on what Stella looks like today in the Asia Pacific region. So in 2014, we have revenues of 130 million. Our 3-year average for return on equity is 34%. Over the last 4 years, our EBITDA has grown 73%. Our employee satisfaction that we measure every single year is 88%. We ask our customers the same question. So we ask our customers, would you recommend us? And our net promoter score with our customers, surveyed about 6 weeks ago, is 58. And we regularly win awards in our region. So we're regularly recognised as the leading contact centre outsourcer in our region. And this award here is by Frost & Sullivan. It's a nice award because you can't enter it. They award it to you based on the market research that they do. So we're proud of that. The thing we are most proud of, though, is from the day we started, we've shared the rewards with our people. We share our profit and we share it on a monthly basis with our employees. And since the day we started, that's amounted to over $56 million that we've shared back with our employees since day one. Where are we going? So in 2020, our plan is to shift from the 3,500 employees we have, heading up closer to 6,000. We're looking to generate revenues of about 220 million, and we're looking to open 2 new regions within the Asia Pacific region. We still want incredibly high employee satisfaction. We want to improve the Net Promoter Score, and we want to transform our business from what is predominantly a voice-based business today to one that is increasingly less reliant on voice and more back-office style processing. And we still want to be picking up a lot of awards, as I said. You might want to be reflecting, as I asked you earlier, about the pictures that you would share if you were standing up here, about the pictures that would tell your journey. You might also want to be reflecting for your own organisation, what are you going to look like in 5 years' time? Have you got clarity about where you're going as an organisation? And, can you share that with your team? All right, let's get into 16 years of our history and the 3 stories that I mentioned earlier. Can you think of a moment in your company's history where everything that you had built, everything you had strived for, was all suddenly at risk? Where all of a sudden, this single event could actually change the course of your company, and in fact your company might not exist anymore. I'm pretty sure most of us can. For us, this experience came early. We opened our first call centre in a place in Australia called the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast is in Queensland, and as you can see from the picture, think sun, surf, sand and parties. A little bit like I understand spring break is in Florida here. So, sounds like the ideal spot to open a call centre, right? Believe it or not, it actually is. And one of the reasons for that is when we opened there 16 years ago, this was a place where most of the employment that was offered to people was seasonal, tourism-based, and it was casual employment. We were going into an area and we were offering 150 permanent full-time jobs to people. Our employment opportunities and the jobs we were offering were unique in that location, and it was one of the things that took us there in the first place. The first opportunity we had was to support a very large telco. Think AT&T in this marketplace, a very large, dominant Australian organisation. They awarded us work, and so we were off. We employed 150 people, we trained those people, and we kicked off from this location in the Gold Coast. Now, this telco was very heavily unionised, and the union were particularly concerned about job losses from that organisation and also probably membership as a result of that telco outsourcing. So they did everything they could to try and stop the telco from outsourcing. What they did was they found a piece of legislation that was created for the specific purpose of preventing companies from entering Chapter 11, shifting all of their assets to a new company and continuing to operate. That legislation was called transmission of business. So the union sued Stella. They sued us. And a judge found in their favour. The outcome of that was that we had to immediately apply all of the telco companies' terms and conditions of employment to our workforce. That meant we had to increase our employees' wages by 20%. That meant that we were not competitive and we didn't have a business model. We had one option, and the option for us was effectively to have all of our employees voluntarily shift across to what were called individual common law contracts. We couldn't coerce anyone, and everyone was watching us. The union were levelling all sorts of allegations at us at the time. There was all sorts of stuff printed about our organisation in the media, some really lovely headlines in Australian newspapers at the time. How would you feel if that was your company and these words were splashed across the newspapers? You've just arrived, you've employed 150 people, and this is what's going on. It was pretty embarrassing at the time. And a lot of things they were saying were talking about the fact that we were running sweatshops, we were treating people poorly, and they were all very, very untrue. So one thing we had done early with our people is we'd started playing the great game of business, and we were very excited. We were overzealous, probably. We shared everything, and I mean everything. We made decisions by consensus. In some ways, all the classic early mistakes of organisations adopting open book management. But the one thing we had right is we were communicating and we were sharing everything. We were sharing how the business operated and we were sharing our story with people. So the time came for the vote, and 98% of our employees volunteered to shift to individual common law contracts. That meant 98% of our employees volunteered for a 20% drop in pay and conditions. Unbelievable. We were so incredibly relieved. We appealed the decision, the initial court decision, and the process took 18 months. That 18 months, if we'd not had the alternative of shifting people to common law contracts, would have meant we were out of business. 18 months later, the appeal came through in our favour. Our business model was vindicated, and this time, this newspaper articles, the press, everything else going on in Australia, the reason everyone was watching us so closely was that it didn't just apply to our business. So this court decision had the ability to basically apply to any business anywhere in Australia who wanted to outsource any service. So it wasn't specific to the call centre industry, it was very, very wide-reaching. So back to the balance on this one, and let's sort of talk through this scenario. Because we had a couple of options here if you think about it. So anytime you're at a turning point as an organisation, you've got to consider which way you're going to turn and what you're going to do. So let's test this scenario here in the same way I said earlier. When we think about balance, we think about the impact of decisions on each of these three key stakeholders. So let's talk about our people. So in this scenario that we had, we were talking about a 20% increase to our people's wages. Okay, so how are our people going to feel about that? Probably pretty good. Tick. Okay, employees, good. That decision is not an adverse decision for our employees. Let's turn to our client. Our client pays us a fixed price. So is there any concern from our client's perspective about what we're paying our people? Probably not. So the client's happy. Let's put a tick against the client. And then we'll think about the shareholder. So the shareholder's invested money in this business and the shareholder's expecting a return out of this business. All of a sudden, we've passed employee wages on of 20%, made no other change. Shareholder is losing money. This is a brand new business. Are you likely to want to grow or keep your money invested in this business if it was yours coming out of your own pocket? Probably not. That's okay. We've got an alternative. The alternative is employees happy, 20% increase, we go and talk to our client. We go and sit down with our client, we explain the situation and we say, so therefore we need to put your price up by 20%. Client says, no, thank you. I'll take my work and I'll go and take it to someone else down the road who can offer me the price that you were initially willing to offer. Therefore they take the work away, therefore we have no jobs, we have no job security for our employees. So as you step through each one of these scenarios and test the decisions against each of those stakeholders, it became pretty clear to us that we had one avenue only, and that one avenue was to fight hard for our business model, to fight hard for the ability to continue to offer what were competitive wages. We had no trouble attracting people, and we needed to stand up and fight for the integrity of our business. So I want to just show you quickly how we spent time educating our team on those three key stakeholders and how we spent time connecting the dots for people on the relationships. We came up with a program that we call Stella the Movie. And in Stella the Movie, it's a 1.5 hour session. It's an interactive two-way session where basically we tease out, when you make a movie, what are the key roles involved? And you can see that there's a producer who puts money up, there's a director who tells people what to do, and there's cast and crew who actually get on with making the movie itself. And we translated that to a Stella environment. So we do this with every single employee in our business in the first 6 months of their employment. And so we take them through, who's our producer? It's our shareholder. They put money into this business. How do shareholders get money out of a business? What sort of things might they expect? If they put their money in a bank, what return would they get? And therefore, what return should they expect if they've invested in something that's higher risk than a bank? We spend a lot of time talking about it. We then talk about our clients. All of our clients choose us for very different reasons. Some choose us because they're looking for savings. Some choose us because they're looking to improve their customer relationships and their own net promoter score. Some choose us because they're looking for top-line sales growth. And some choose us because they want all three. But we work hard with our clients at the very beginning of the relationship because it's so critical to understand what actually matters to them, because we want to translate that right through our business. We want to give our employees a direct line of sight between how they've got to meet these and how it connects to our bottom line. And then we spend time with our people. And we're all involved in business, and I'm sure you're all involved in your businesses for very different reasons. Some people are there for development, some people are there for the pay, some people are there for, career opportunities. Most of us are probably there for some form of job security. We invest a lot of time in talking to people about this. So this first story that I've shared with you taught us a lot of things. It taught us to build the trust really early with your team and share what your business is all about right from day one. It showed us that this open book management model, that to that point none of the leadership team of the business had any opportunities with, was something that could really fly. That this was a business model that was going to have a chance of making us successful in the Australian market, and so we were off. I'm going to take you all the way forward in this second story to March 2010, 12 years later. Not much had happened in this time. We had 8 sites in Australia. We'd actually been pretty busy. We'd employed a lot of people. We'd grown, so we'd launched a business in Manila. We'd launched 2 businesses in the US, and we were growing. The Australian business was heavily relied upon at this point in time to provide cash. The cash coming out of this business was funding our global growth. So there was a very strong link between performance in this business and everything else we were doing. At the time, as a leadership team, we were very busy with our shiny new toys. We were off growing the business. We were doing all sorts of exciting things, and we were distracted, we were stretched, and we weren't focused on what was going on in the business behind us. The Australian business sneezed. And when I say sneezed, it's probably more like they got the flu. In a single month, the Australian business lost, if I said 500,000, would that shock you? 600,000? $800,000 in 1 month. How does a business with a profitable, strong track record go from that to losing $800,000 in a month? In this story, I want to share how we did that. The figure doesn't really matter whether it's 800,000 or 80,000 or 8,000 if you think in your own businesses, could you sustain a loss like that? We certainly couldn't. There's 2 key things that were going on in our business at the time. Remember the balance I spoke about? We had a relationship with a client who was very demanding, had every right to be very demanding. They were also a very large percentage of our business. We had at the time a very big single client dependency, and so we relied very, very heavily on them for our business success, and we were scared of them. They kept asking us, could we do a little more, and a little more, and a little more? And while we're at it, could we do a little more? Just like this child here building his Lego tower, we were continuing to add on extras and extras and extras. Unfortunately, the commercial agreement we had in place with our client didn't support all of these extras. The way the client paid us, they paid us for a fixed period of time. In our language, that's calls, and those calls were priced to be 10 minutes long. We'd stopped communicating with our people about what we needed to do to make sure we were achieving balance for all of our shareholders. So those calls were taking us 15 minutes. That meant we needed to employ more people, we needed to pay more wages, and the client wasn't paying us anymore. Our Lego tower suddenly looked like that. So we had a couple of things we needed to do to try and turn this around. And the first one was we had to sit down with our client, and even though we were scared of doing this and we were scared of losing the relationship, we had to sit down and establish back to those basics of what really mattered, what did they really need us to do, and let's get really clear clarity on that. Let's go back to that 10 minutes and what we can do in those 10 minutes. We then had to engage our people and remind them about balance. We had to remind them about the fact that we had to meet the needs of all of our shareholders, all of our stakeholders, and in fact that the 10 minutes mattered. Whose fault was it? You know, it certainly wasn't our employees' fault. We'd stopped communicating what mattered, and so they were bending over backwards to do everything they could to satisfy this client. We'd always asked them to do that, we'd always done that, and so they were bending over backwards to do exactly what they thought was the right thing. Was it our client's fault? No, it wasn't our client's fault. You got to ask, and every time they asked, we were doing. So we were sitting in this situation where quite clearly as a leadership team it was our fault. We had the biggest lesson of all. We'd done the culture. We'd invested an enormous amount of time and energy into our culture up front. We'd educated everybody. And all of a sudden, we'd started focusing on bright new shiny things, and we forgot that you can't stop focusing on your culture. We needed to find a way to give our culture its own KPI. We needed to find a way, as we'd grown to, at the time, 2,500 employees, and today 3,500, we needed to find a way to make sure that we could measure where all the things that mattered to us as an organisation, all the things that underpinned our culture were still performing well, were still delivering well, that the learning, that the understanding of all of these core processes was still intact. And it led us to creating what we call Centre of Excellence. Centre of Excellence is a process where we identify all the core things that matter to our culture. It focuses on things like how are we communicating as a business? How are we inducting people into our business? How are our huddles performing? We actually score our huddles. Our monthly performance reviews, we meet monthly with every employee in the business, with their line manager. What's the quality of those conversations like? What's the quantity of those conversations like? Are we meeting our commitments? We assess skip-level meetings. Skip-level meetings being skip a level of management, have an honest, two-way conversation about what's going on in the business. What is the quality of those conversations? We focus on our profit sharing. We track every month what percentage of our employees are receiving an incentive. What's the average incentive? What's the average payout? Is everything working? Are we meeting our commitments to all three of our stakeholders? We focus on the things that make us operationally excellent. We focus on the things that keep clients staying with us and coming back to us. Things like outlier performance management, critical number education. Do people understand those things? 24-month rolling forecast. How far into the future are we looking as a business? How well do our teams understand what's going on in their business? We measure all of those. And then we give them a star rating. 1-star novice up to 5 stars expert, and we run a health check every year in every site. It's deliberately a health check. It's not an audit. It's a health check, because what we're doing is we're going in to assess that the learning is still intact. And if the learning isn't intact, it's a coaching opportunity. So we assess this information. We assess it monthly, and we run competitions and games across the business. We have one called Game On. It's a monthly get-together for every site where people are focused on a mix of key performance indicator and cultural performance indicators. And we have trophies that circulate around the business. It's really hotly contested, this stuff. So, I guess my question to you as an audience is, we learnt an enormous lesson out of this. We learnt a lesson that culture is a discipline, that you can't do it once and assume that it's done, that you've got to nurture it every day, every month, and you've got to have a way of understanding that it's still in place. So when you reflect on your own organisations, how do you know that your own culture's intact? Is it more than just a feeling? Can you put your finger on the key things that actually support your culture? And do you know they're still there? Do you know they're not slipping? Do you know that that as you grow, your culture is scalable, that it can grow with you? Have you got the foundations in place to support that? Now, I've shared 2 stories with you already, and let me just reflect briefly again on the 2 key learnings out of those stories for us. First story for us was all about engage your people early, build a culture of trust, share with people what your business model is, check people understand why is everybody involved in the business and connect those relationships for them. And secondly, out of this story, culture is a discipline. You can't do it once. Don't make the mistake we did. So, July 2013, we were in a fantastic spot. Everything in our business was going well. We had our seatbelt on. We designed processes to make sure our culture wasn't slipping. All of our indicators across the business were improving. Our employee satisfaction was improving. Our retention was improving. Our client results were improving. We had clients signing long-term contract, everything going well. Perfect spot. And then I got a phone call. I got the sort of phone call no one wants to get. It wasn't the tax office and it wasn't the police. My kids are too young for that. It was a phone call from a client. It was a phone call from a client we'd worked with for 16 years, a phone call from a client that we still work with today. And they were sharing with me that they had made a decision. They'd made a decision that was going to require us to close one of our sites. It was going to require us to close our Adelaide site. This was a site that we had opened some 12 years before. It was a site where we employed 200 people. It was a site where we had spent time, where we'd invested a lot of energy. We'd educated people on what they needed to do to control their own futures. We'd had all those business conversations. We'd done it all right. The client's decision was not a performance-based decision. This team was strong performers. They'd made their decision for their reasons and it was their right to make that decision. Can you imagine how we felt? Can you imagine how you would feel if you got a call like that? And regardless of the numbers, whether it's 200 or 22 or 2 people, no one wants to be in a situation like I was in that day. So, back to the call. Let me show you the Adelaide team first. This is the Adelaide team. So, just like you would have in your business, these are all good people. These are all people who'd come to work to do a great job every day. And a lot of these people had been with us for more than 10 years. So these were the people that I was going to go and share news with, that they were no longer going to be part of the Stellar family. So let's go back to that call. Within 3 days we had a plan. And the plan was, we understood the time frame, we had 6 months, and we understood that the site was going to close. So I said to the client that I would be flying to Adelaide immediately and I would be sharing this news with the team. Every instinct I had, based on the culture that we'd built in our business, was whether it's good news, bad news, you need to be there and you need to share that news with people. You need to help people take control of their own situation as early as you can. It was not the way we were built as an organisation to not share that information. And the client said no. They said no. The client said no, we don't want you to go and do that. And I insisted. I had to work really hard to convince the client, and as we worked through the conversation, what became clear to me was that the client was scared. They were scared that we would tell our people this news and our people would let them down, that they wouldn't stay as long as we needed them to stay, and therefore we wouldn't be able to meet the commitments to our clients' customers to answer the calls that they were relying on us to answer. And I said to the client that they had to trust me on this, that for 16 years we'd delivered results to these guys, that for 16 years the way we delivered results to these guys was based on a single fundamental, and that was that we communicated openly with our employees all the time, and that we would meet the commitments to them, and that we wouldn't let them down. The one thing I wasn't prepared to risk as a result of any of this was the integrity of our own business model. So I convinced the client and I flew to Adelaide with some of my colleagues. So on the actual day, we met with the leadership team first of all, and we shared the news. I knew that we were going to rely on those same leaders the following day. Difficult time for those guys. The following day we had 200 people to share the news with, and we shared that news in groups of 30 at a time. There were lots of tears that day, and there were lots of anger that day. There was also an enormous amount of respect shown on that day. Respect for each other's colleagues, as I asked each group to allow me to share the news personally with each group. And they did that. Within 1 hour of sharing news with our team, 95% of our employees went straight out and back on the phones, back on the job, meeting their commitments to our client and to our client's customers. More than 50% of our employees stayed to the very last day, and that was more than we had initially intended or needed because of a spike in call volumes. And so we had to ask some people to stay right until the very end. That day, I know our client was nervous and I know they were watching very closely. But I know we delighted them in the way that we continue to delight them through until today. That experience remains for me as one of the hallmarks of our culture. And despite the fact that we were sharing incredibly difficult news with people, the foundations we'd put in place, the trust that we'd built with our people really shone through on that day, and it remains for me as one of the most humbling experiences I've ever had as a leader. Our learnings from that actual day, there were many, but the biggest lesson from that day was don't let anything risk the integrity of your business model. Nothing is worth risking the integrity of that. And for us, what mattered more than anything else was we had always shared news, whether it was good or bad, with our team. And I could not risk that anyone in our team was going to hear that news from anyone other than myself. Don't risk your business model. Adelaide closed at the end of January this year. Now, I do want to share with you in closing a video that we show to all of our employees as part of their induction, and it's going to wrap up the themes of what I've talked about today. But I guess before I do that, I just wanted to say that I've shared 3 stories with you today, and I've deliberately chosen 3 stories that perhaps are the most challenging stories of our time as an organisation. I could have stood up here and shared with you some wonderful fist-pumping success stories because there have been many, many of those. But I don't think that they would have given me the opportunity to share with you how the underpinnings of our culture really helped us survive some of these challenges. And when we're thinking about building a sustainable business, we've got to put in place a foundation that's actually going to help us through those times. They're the times that matter most. The way you get through those, the way you recover from those, to me, I think they're the things that matter most. And they're the things in a company's history that as you reflect back on the ups and downs, they're probably the things that stand out. There's no doubt to me that our open book management culture, the relationship that we've built with our people and the foundation of educating people about what the business is about, has helped us become the leader within the Australian marketplace. But open book management has always been complemented by a core set of values, and values that have underpinned the way we've approached everything. These values are up here, and as I reflect across the stories, they were there in each of those stories. Respect. For us, respect, if I think back to the story I shared about Adelaide as a starting point, respect and integrity came shining through in each of those. We have a lot of fun as an organisation. We don't take ourselves seriously. Business is serious, but we have a lot of fun. So there's a lot of laughter about a whole range of things. Innovation, constantly trying to find a way to do something new and change the way you do things. Improve, continually improving. And transparency. Without a doubt, transparency is probably, it's hard to sort of single out one that's more important than others, but transparency is probably the thing that sets us apart more than anything else. Those transparent relationships that we also share with our clients. We do share with our clients the profit margins that we intend to make out of our relationships with them, and they love it. It takes away all the sort of nonsense in the relationship. So transparency is another key one. So again, the 3 takeaways before we go to the video. Engage your people early. Share your vision, share your business model. Work out, as I said earlier, what do you need to do to keep your business in balance? What do you need to do to make sure that you've got your seatbelt on as an organisation? Nurture your culture. It's a discipline. Don't do it once. You've got to do it every single day. And make sure you can measure it in some way, shape or form. And then the final one, don't risk the integrity of your business model. You know, the principles that you start with will be the principles you end with. So make sure you've got really clear intent about those. Thank you very much, and we'll go to the video. Thank you. So I think we've got some time for questions. 15 minutes for questions. Okay, great.
Great presentation, Melissa. Tell me, how do you connect with your customer and transmit this idea? I really get it well how you connect with the employees, but how do you tell the customer that this is a competitive advantage and explain the great game of business and open book management when I'm a customer and I just want to know, do I get what are you better than somebody else? How do you make that relationship?
A couple of different things. One of the first things that we talk to our clients about is that connection we draw between what makes their business successful. So what do they need us to do to make their business successful? So we spend a lot of time kind of trying to get under the covers with the client to say, what are the 3 things we can do that are going to make you the best in your business? Because what we then do is we translate that information directly through to the performance indicators that our employees have to meet. And we explain to our employees why those things matter to our client. So in essence, what we're saying to our client is every month we are going to reinvest some of our profit back into rewarding our employees for delivering what you need to make your business successful. So it's quite powerful. For them, our employees become an extension of, you know, they don't just get to learn about Stella's business. We've also got to educate them about our clients' business. So they become a very powerful, engaged force for our clients' companies as well as for Stella.
I could have at least met you halfway. Sorry about that.
Thanks. What a gentleman.
Thank you for the presentation. It was excellent. Question on your balance triangle. You've got 3, the customer, the client, your people. Especially appropriate here in St. Louis. I mean, the arch is a triangle as well. If you look at it, it's a 3-sided structure. But can you tell us when 2 of those are in conflict with the other? Maybe give us an example of how you're able to overcome that, because whenever there's 3, it can be unstable when 2 have interests that are in conflict with the other. So is there an example of how you're able to work through that?
It's a great question, and I'm thinking there will be hundreds of those. Let me think of an example. I mean, I can give you a heap of really sort of simple ones. I'm just trying to think of a really good sort of conflict side. Okay, here's one that we often talk through with our employees. So quite often the commercial arrangement we put in place with our clients, as I referenced in the story earlier, means that there is a length of time attached to how long we can stay on the phone talking to a customer. So obviously it's an average, so you're going to have some very long calls and some short calls, but on average, let's say those calls need to be 5 minutes long. And the reason they need to be 5 minutes long is a whole range of different drivers. Number one, that's what the client's prepared to pay, if you like, for those. So they've obviously worked out what they've got to do to stay competitive themselves. So there's a commercial reality to their business about the length of that call. There's therefore a commercial reality to Stella's business because we get paid for that length of time. Quite often, it's really common for me to hear across our call centres feedback from our employees that I can't possibly get everything that needs to be done. I can't possibly deliver the best customer experience to the customer in that length of time. And so early on, we need to spend a lot of time with our team really, number one, validating it is possible to do it. So we're not going to expect people to do the impossible, so we spend a lot of time validating that it can be done, that in that length of time you can actually achieve all of the things you need to achieve. That's when it comes back to the connecting the dot in the relationships and educating people, because one of the things we need to work through is our client is our director. So our client is defining for us what the customer experience is that they want delivered to their customers. And so we have to help our employees understand sometimes that they might have their own very personal understanding, because I think we all do, of what, good customer service is. And for some people that means, going above and beyond and the extra mile and satisfying every single thing we can, and is there anything else I can help you with today? And while I'm at it, can I do this and can I do that as well? That's some people's interpretation of good customer service. If you cut back to our clients, often our clients are saying, our customers don't actually want to spend a long time on the phone with you, and quite frankly, they probably don't even want to call you. So when they do call you, this is the things that we need done. It needs to be done efficiently. You need to answer the questions. You need to check they're satisfied at the end of the call, but that's what we want, not that. So that's a regular conversation we have in our business between satisfying that dilemma, if you like, between a person's individual feeling about, is this satisfying me and what's this definition of customer service, and then the business reality of, I guess, our client and also our shareholder. So hopefully that provides an example of one of those things. But there's a lot of times where they're in tension or conflict with each other. One over there, one there.
Hello? Oh, sorry.
One up there, hello.
That was a wonderful presentation, so thank you for that. Developing a culture is really difficult to do with the right people, but getting the right people in the first place is very hard as well. Are there particular tools or principles you use in your hiring practices?
We do. So a non-negotiable for us is around culture and values. So, I won't give you a specific tool, if you like, but what I will say is that we heavily rate on the side of attitude and values, and far, far less on the skill side of things. We can teach people the skills. We really need people with the right attitude coming into our business. So that would be the key focus for us.
Fascinating story. I was particularly interested in your culture performance indicators as opposed to key performance indicators. Could you talk a little bit about how you develop that with your team?
Sure. I guess the starting point for us is that we know our culture's going to be stronger the more time we're investing up front in educating people about what the culture is. So what is open book management, and educating people about our business and our clients' business. So I guess what we did was we stepped through, when we had that sort of, shock horror, and it was 3 months before I stepped into the CEO role. So you can imagine how attractive the CEO role was looking at that point in time. But we sat down and we really went through what are all of the things that build towards an educated and engaged workforce, because that was the end goal that we were looking for from a cultural perspective. And so that's where we said, are we? Sometimes it was simple as saying, we've got these tools, we've got these sessions, we've got these programs, are we doing them? Or are they sitting on a shelf in a book? And a lot of our stuff was sitting on a shelf. We thought, because we'd done the culture, that people were then continuing to roll these programs out, but they weren't. People had, forgotten. Got distracted with other things. So really, some of those things were how much time and how well were we talking about the stories and the things that mattered in our business? Were we meeting our commitments to our employees? So were we coaching our employees? Were we spending that direct engagement time where we were talking about the business, talking about them, and focusing on, I guess, the business and the culture? So it was really just, and it's evolved over time. So, I think as Joe said in my bio, I firmly believe that open book management is a journey. You know, you're constantly learning, you're constantly changing, you're constantly checking back on your business to make sure are things working the way they should be. And so ours is evolving as well. You know, you see this gets a little out of kilter, so let's adjust this, stop measuring that, that's not really delivering any outcomes, let's focus over here. What are all the leading indicators from a cultural perspective? We also measure the outcomes, but the outcomes is too late. Get in behind and work out what are all the leading input things you can measure that drive your culture.
Hi, Melissa. I'm Michael Hartman from Amy's Ice Creams in Austin, Texas. Thank you so much for that presentation. I actually found myself getting a little teary towards the end of it. I was so engaged in your narrative. And by the end, I felt a proud familiarity of shared values and goals, and I think a lot of people in this room probably felt the same, so thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, when all of your 3,500 employees, your company is much more sizable than ours, but what is your process for explaining what open book management is to people as they're considering taking a job with you, and then once they accept the job, immediately how do you engage them?
Okay, so we are quite lucky in some of the areas where we recruit now because we have got a good reputation, so people will come to us. And if I think of the Gold Coast in particular, that's been the case for some years now, where through referrals and family and friends, people have heard about, you know, this is an okay place to work, so they're actually coming along with some expectation. When we advertise, we do advertise on the basis of, you know, and it's different everywhere, it's tweaked everywhere, but we do advertise on the basis of wanting to join a company where, you know, it's more than a job, where you'll be engaged in understanding how the business works. So we do try and early on get to people about the fact that they're going to learn, they're going to be sort of educated about the business. So we're trying to engage that curiosity, I guess, in the first instance. And then when people join us, the interview process focuses a lot on our culture. So we talk a lot about the culture at that stage. And as I said, we're focusing very much on attitude at that point. When people join us, that whole induction process is a really interesting one for us. And the reason I say that is because if you think about the people in my business, the people in my business, they need to learn about our client's business before they learn about ours. So quite often they'll join our business and they'll have 2 weeks, and in some cases 6 weeks, of product training, very client, very specific product training. I'm calling about booking a cruise. I'm calling about booking a flight. I'm calling because I need a mobile phone, a cell phone. So they've got to focus on that product stuff first. So the interesting thing for us is we only do a very, very small touch on stellar history and stellar culture day one, and we let them get on with the business of learning their job. But day one, they're immersed in our culture. So they're seeing it, feeling it. They're seeing the profit and loss statements up, and we're sharing those. We haven't educated them yet on what they mean yet, but they're seeing that this information is shared and it's open and it's there. Then, as we go through, and it depends, because if it's a 6-week client training program, people's heads are full of stuff. And so we can't try and put any more in front of them. We've got to time that very carefully. So somewhere in that first 3 to 6 months, that they're living the culture and whatever, they've already started receiving their monthly bonus payments, but we actually sit down then and we take them through that session I shared earlier called Stella the Movie, and that's where we really get into why do we exist as a business? Why are we here? What's our purpose as a business? Why do our clients choose us? Because they can choose someone else. You know, and we talk about how can people take control of their own futures, because no one can guarantee a job for life, I don't believe anymore. But what we do is we educate people on what are the things they can do to influence, influence outcomes. And, you know, it's really interesting. We run competitions all the time with 3,500 people, and the call centre industry Employee turnover is a challenge for us. Now, we've worked and improved on that, and we've got some outstanding numbers in our business, but it's still a challenge. We still have people rotating through our business. There's always 20 to 30% of people in our business are new. So we're always investing a lot in that culture. And when we run some of those games, some of the feedback, and even from some of the people sitting at the table with you who happen to be from Stella in Australia, when we run those competitions, I remember Kerry sitting at the table over there said that as a result of the education that he got out of, certain sort of competitions and things we ran, he never realised how powerful he was as an individual in terms of contributing to our business. And those sort of things are gold. When you hear, one of your people in your business tell you that, because it's clicked. They've worked out, I'm not a number, I matter, and I actually contribute to the outcome of this business. So that's a little bit about the journey, but it's an ongoing journey. It's constant. All of our leaders in our business are coaches, so they're constantly spending time with people working about, what's the next thing we can sort of educate people on. Hope that answers the question. And well done for Amy's Ice Cream as well. Nice to see you guys up there in the opening.
Hi, Melissa. Nicholas Del Sesso from Ecotech in Australia.
Oh, an Australian accent.
Yes. Thanks for an inspiring presentation, and one in which culture is obviously a big part of your business. A challenge we're about to face is to take our culture into a developing country, which has, from the outside, very different values to what we have in Australia. Can you tell us a bit about how you take essentially an Australian system and put it in the Philippines? How do you take that culture, and do you adapt it?
It's a great question, because I guess when we started our business, Nicholas, we picked up what was an American, open book management and interpretation, and we weren't sure how it was going to resonate with an Australian culture, and it has beautifully, absolutely beautifully. We then launched in Manila. So we had the opportunity, and we've now got 1,500 employees in Manila and growing quickly. So we had the opportunity to introduce that culture into another culture within the Asia Pacific region. And, I think my feeling on that, my instinct on that is, regardless of culture, people are people. And I think at the end of the day, one thing that everyone has in common is that people want to genuinely feel valued, and they want to genuinely feel that they're contributing to the outcomes of a business. So, I think you can engage people and switch on that learning in any culture. And maybe, we might think typically some of the Asian cultures are more used to a traditional hierarchical approach. I think you can have a good balance of the two. You can still, have a very much respect for older hierarchies, but you can still put open book management in place. You can still work through that and still get to the point where, as we said earlier, no one is more important than anyone else. People have just got different jobs to do. And we've got 3 people from our team in Manila here with us. We've got our country head, we've got our head of HR and head of client services in Manila. So if you come across those guys, I'd explore that question with them directly. Works very well for us. We're all good. Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your time.